Hello and welcome to podcast number 29 on the apocalypse. My name is Steve. In my previous podcast, I introduced the book, The Apocalypse Letter by Letter, a literary analysis of the book of Revelation by Stephen Paul. I'm going to pick up from the last podcast on the seven plagues and drill down on the seventh. As the anti-Christian armies begin to converge on Palestine, Christ's warning in chapter 16, verse 15 must be heeded. Behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and is clothed, not going about naked and exposed to shame. This verse makes it perfectly clear that persecution or the threat of it will continue until the total defeat of the beast. When Christ said that one who perseveres to the end would be saved, he meant the end, the very end. Christians free of persecution must remain faithful to that standard of conduct set by Christ. And the warning applies especially to the soldiers in Palestine, because the vast majority of them will not survive the coming battle. In chapter 16, verse 17, the seventh angel poured out his bowl upon the air, and a loud voice came out of the sanctuary from the throne saying, "It is done." Literally, it came to be, or it came into being, aorist tense. Since it was Christ who began the martyrion, it will be he who utters that it is finished. Again, the statement is prophetic in the sense that the end is certain. It is as good as done from Christ's eternal point of view. This brief statement alludes to the birth pangs as well, for the new heaven and new earth are about to be born, and the pain and suffering will be over. The former things have passed away. The events of the seventh plague are listed in chapter 16, verses 18 through 21. The order in which these events are listed or mentioned is not the order in which these events will actually happen. To demonstrate the actual order of events, each event must be understood for what it is, and then its occurrence in the sequence can be accurately ascertained. In verse 18, the lightnings or flashes of lightning, the voices, and the peals of thunder are the same as those flashes of lightnings and voices and peals of thunder mentioned in chapter 4, verse 5. They come from the throne. The lightnings symbolize miracles wrought by the church to counteract the false signs and wonders of the dragon, beast, false prophet, and the demons they sent out to the kings of the world. The voices are those of the four living beings who are preaching, exhorting, and instructing the faithful. The thunders are direst warnings from the headquarters of the church, warnings about the imminent defeat of the beast and his hordes, as well as about the great earthquake soon to strike the world. And the thunders are anathemas against the false teachings, false miracles, and false prophets. The earthquake in verse 18 is in a separate clause modified by adjective clauses to impress upon the reader the intensity of that earthquake. And a great earthquake happened, such as did not happen since man came to be upon the earth. The violent earthquake was so great. Verse 19 continues. And the city, the great one, became unto three parts, and the cities of the nations fell down. In the view of the fact that this event happened during the seventh plague, the phrase, the cities of the nations, must be understood as relating to the cities of the whole world, including those of the great eagle, and not as relating only to those in the nations designated the sea. The city, the great one, is not Babylon the Great, but Jerusalem. John makes this point clear by stating the great harlot's fate in the next sentence of verse 19. And Babylon the Great was remembered in the presence of God to give her the cup of the wine of the fury of his wrath. Verse 20 mentions that every island fled away and mountains were not found. The symbols here are the same as those in chapter 6, verse 14. However, in this case, the islands and mountains are not merely moved out of their places, but vanish altogether. Islands are prophetic symbols for provinces and dependencies, and mountains represent kingdoms. This verse indicates that there will be absolutely nothing left of the political structure of the beast's global empire, and with that structure will also go the neo-paganism of Antichrist. Verse 21 states, And hail, great as a talent, fell from heaven upon the people, and the people from the plague of hail cursed God, because great is the terrible plague of it. This verse describes an aspect of the Battle of Armageddon itself. Note two things here. The hail is from heaven, which means it is from the Catholic armies. Each hail weighs a talent, a Greek unit of measurement equivalent to almost 50 pounds. The hail's uniformity of weight indicates that the hail is man-made. Extant in the ordnance of the U.S. military, besides military artillery rounds, are two weapons that fit the description of this hail: cluster bombs and anti-personnel missiles. A cluster bomb can break up into a wide spread of smaller bombs like grenades, either in the air or upon impact with the ground. An anti-personnel missile flies about 100 yards above the battlefield, ejecting numerous small bombs left and right to various distance as far as 100 yards, thus cutting a swath 200 yards wide through a large mass of assaulting infantry. Note again that impenitence is implied in the last verse, notwithstanding that the slaughter, as described in chapter 14, verse 20, will be appalling. The sixth plague will dry up the Euphrates River so that the vast hordes of anti-Christians from the east, China, India, etc., can arrive at Armageddon within a specific tract of time to fight the battle. This means before the great earthquake. The reason Antichrist will order the destruction of Babylon the Great is to occasion fear in his followers, fear that will override any feelings of reluctance to obey his summons. Babylon's destruction will send a clear message. If the beast will destroy his most valuable city that did not defect, it can only be imagined what he will do to those who in fact do defect. The psychological value of destroying Babylon would become irrelevant as soon as the battle began. Chapter 19 contains a song of jubilation and thanksgiving to God for the great harlot's destruction, followed by a description of Christ as the commander of the armies of heaven going into battle, followed in turn by a brief description of the capture of the beast and false prophet, and this sequence corresponds to that implied by chapter 14, verse 8. Furthermore, since the great earthquake will fell the cities of the world, it must be assumed that bridges and roads will be severely damaged and that mountain passes will have avalanches. Consequently, the armies from the east could not possibly traverse the Zagros Mountains, for example, at the western side of the plateau of Oran, or the Sion, Kirthan, and Sulamane ranges to the east. Also, the beast would not be able to destroy Babylon during the fifth plague of darkness. Therefore, if he destroyed it earlier, the inhabitants of the city would not be punished by the fourth plague that falls upon all. For the same reasons, the great earthquake cannot occur earlier than the battle, and if it occurred during the battle, it would become not only difficult or impossible to fight the battle, but also it would negate an important sign to the world that the armies of heaven, though vastly outnumbered, defeated the anti-Christians led by the beast and the false prophet themselves. Hence, the given information indicates that the seventh plague's sequence of events will run thus: lightnings, voices, and thunders from the beginning of the seventh plague until the end, destruction of Babylon the Great, the plague of hail during the battle of Armageddon, and the capture of the beast and the false prophet at the end of the battle will signal the time for the great earthquake. Jerusalem will be split into three parts, the cities of the world will fall to the ground, and thus the beast's islands and mountains will exist no longer. I leave to the reader's imagination what destruction the worldwide earthquake will cause, even after it is ended: burning cities and towns, no usable roads or bridges, tsunami hundreds of feet high from oceans and Great Lakes, vast forest fires, etc. It is reasonable to assume, however, that Enoch and Elijah shall have prepared the church for what it must do in the aftermath. I do not see that much explanation for chapter 19 is necessary, for its contents are easily understood. One important point is that the bride mentioned in chapter 19, verses 7 and 8, is the whole church, and the armies of heaven mentioned in chapter 19, verse 14, are part of the church. Let's read that. Let us rejoice and exult and give him glory, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. It was granted her to be clothed with fine linen, bright and pure, for the fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. And the armies of heaven, arrayed in fine linen, white and pure, followed him on white horses. Hence, both are described as wearing fine linen, bright and pure. In the Old Testament, there was only one nation that worshipped and served God, Israel. Thus, there was only one army of heaven, a term that becomes plural at Armageddon because the members of the church are from many nations. The United States of America is the melting pot. Its citizens or their ancestors have come from all over the world. The armies of heaven, however, seem to imply that the Catholic force at Armageddon will not be American only. At this point, speculation rears its pinhead, for only time will tell what the United States will do in regard to the Catholic nations south of it, especially those down to the Isthmus of Panama, where the beast begins ascending from the abyss. Two things more. It is obvious that chapter 14, verses 17 through 20 corresponds to chapter 19, verses 11 through 19. Start with chapter 14. And another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Then another angel came out from the altar, the angel who has power over fire, and he called with a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, "Put in your sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe." So the angel swung his sickle on the earth and gathered the vintage of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia. Now going to verses 11 through 20. Then I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse. He who sat upon it is called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. His eyes are like a flame of fire, and on his head are many diadems, and he has a name inscribed which no one knows but himself. He is clad in a robe dipped in blood, and the name by which he is called is the Word of God. And the armies of heaven, arrayed in fine linen, white and pure, followed him on white horses. From his mouth issues a sharp sword with which to smite the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. He will tread the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God the Almighty. On his robe and high on his thigh, he has a name inscribed, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Then I saw an angel standing in the sun, and with a loud voice he called to all the birds that fly in mid-heaven, "Come gather for the great supper of God, to eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses and their riders, and the flesh of all men, both free and slave, both small and great." And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth with their armies gathered to make war against him who sits upon the horse and against his army. It is possible the sword, the Ramphia, in chapter 19, verse 15, alludes to the armies of heaven in sickle-shaped battle line. Chapter 17 has already been explained, and already has enough been said about chapter 18. As to the items John mentioned in chapter 18, verses 12 and 13, it is obvious he uses those of his day to denote the future luxuries enjoyed by the wealthy, because there were no words yet for television, computers, VCRs, automobiles, airplanes, etc. It says cargo of gold, silver, jewels, and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, and scarlet, all kinds of scented wood, all articles of ivory, all articles of costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, and slaves, that is, human souls. Note also that the captains and the crews can see smoke rising from the burning city. And the kings of the earth who committed fornication and were wanton with her will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning. From chapter 18, verse 9. John did not write that they could see the city itself. This connotes that Babylon the Great could be as far as 120 miles inland from the coast, and the great column of smoke rising from it would be clearly visible to men on ships in the harbors or just off the coast. Remember, this city will be destroyed in 1 hour. They will stand far off in fear of her torment and say, "Alas, alas, thou great city, thou mighty city Babylon, in 1 hour has thy judgment come," from chapter 18, verse 10. All information points to a Catholic country in Europe as the place wherein the city that will be called Babylon the Great stands even now, and it is reasonable to assume the city's population numbers in the millions. Again, one must keep an open mind about this matter. With victory now assured, the next podcast will dive briefly into Apocalypse chapter 20. The book is found at apocalypseletterbyletter.com, and a discount code is provided at the top of the page if you want to buy a copy. You can also buy it at Amazon and other major online booksellers. May the Lord Jesus Christ bless you and keep you.